Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we've got another news and rumor video. In today's video, we're looking at some signings from our past couple of days, some news updates, including a few very interesting things, and we've got some trade rumors involving Boston, Montreal, Utah, and Seattle. We'll go to all the updates from our past couple of days coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And also don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. But in today's video, we've got an interesting one here, another news and rumor video. So today we're going to start off with some signings. There were 8 signings between the 8th and the 9th of July. So touch on all the signings that happened over these 2 days. So first, in the Vancouver Canucks organization, they signed 2 players to league minimum deals. Jet Wu, 1-year league minimum deal, and Nicholas Tolopilo, 2-year league minimum deal. So there's a lot of talk about Sealouts potentially being moved. That could happen by the time this video hits YouTube. So if that does wind up happening after Demko extension, they're going to need a 3rd stringer. And Tolopilo has shown in the past he can be a 3rd stringer and be called upon to be a backup if need be. He's on the younger side. He's only 25 years old, but he has had some stints in the NHL, very short ones, but some. So I definitely want this signing 2 years league minimum for a potential 3rd string goaltender. Not a bad deal there for the Canucks. They also signed Jet Wu, 24-year-old right shot defenseman. He's also an NHL level player, has had sparse time at the NHL level. If the Canucks run into enough injuries, I could see him get some call-up option opportunities, but unless that happens, I definitely think he's more of a AHL level guy. So very interesting out there. But the Canucks signed 2 players to league minimum deals. Then we saw the New York Islanders sign Adam Beckman, one of their RFAs, to a 1-year league minimum deal. Not a bad deal for the Islanders. Beckman was acquired from New Jersey as part of the Dennis Cholowski deal at the trade deadline. Beckman's 24 years old. He's had a couple stints at the NHL level with Minnesota and New Jersey, but has been mostly an AHL player throughout his entire career. But he hasn't really found his game at the NHL level. With the depth the Islanders have at the NHL level, I definitely do think he'll be more of an AHL guy, but could be a call-up option. So we shall wait and see on that. But a solid pickup here for the Islanders, signing Beckman to a 1-year league minimum deal. Another guy who got a 1-year league minimum deal on the 8th was Lucas Cormier in Vegas, one of the remaining RFAs. Need a new deal. Wasn't an overly bad player there for the Vegas Golden Knights the past couple of years. Mostly AHL guy, got a couple of call-up options. Seems like eventually could be a solid 3rd pair guy. Only 23 years old. He's a left shot defenseman, gets a 1-year league minimum deal. Not a bad deal there. Like, he'll probably play the AHL level again. But if they lose a couple of defensemen to injuries, like, I think Cormier will be one of their first call-up options. So very interesting out there. But the Vegas Golden Knights have signed Lucas Cormier to a 1-year league minimum deal. And then going over to 4 we saw over on the 9th. So first up, on the 9th, we saw 4 signings. First one was in Calgary as they signed one of their RFAs, Sam Morton, a center prospect, 25 years old, mostly AHL level guy, hasn't really got much opportunities at the NHL level. 1-year league minimum deal again. So Morton, I think eventually could be a decent bottom 6 forward. So 1-year league minimum for a guy who at this point is potential call-up option. Not a bad deal there for the Flames. Then we saw Dallas Stars, one of their better prospects in their system, Antonio Stranges, 1-year league minimum deal. Stranges is 23 years old. He's a left winger. Really solid player there. I think eventually could be a solid bottom 6, maybe middle 6 forward there for the Dallas Stars. It's not a bad signing there from the Stars as they signed Stranges, and I think that league minimum deal for a potential call-up option, pretty good stuff there for Dallas. And then we saw 2 of the first-round picks from the 2025 draft sign ELCs. As first, the Vancouver Canucks signed 15th overall pick Braden Cootes, who is a center prospect, really solid guy, played over in the WHL this past year, had a really good season, winds up getting a 3-year ELC AV of $975,000. Pretty good sign there for the Canucks. Like, Cootes, I think eventually is going to be the team's second-line center, so they get him on a new deal. Great stuff there for the Vancouver Canucks, and I do think that's a great sign there to sign Cootes. While 11th overall draft selection, Benjamin Kindal, who was also playing over in the WHL this past year, solid right-wing prospect on the smaller side of things, but really solid pickup here for the Pittsburgh Penguins at 11th overall, gets a 3-year ELC, AAV of $975,000. So he's not going to make the NHL roster this year, could potentially make it next year, but I think in the next year or two, Kendall will be able to make the lineup and be a solid top 9 forward going forward for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So very interesting note there. But 2 first-round picks in the 2025 draft, in Cootes and Kendall, have both signed their ELCs with Vancouver and Pittsburgh respectively. So very interesting note there. But those are all signing updates from the past little while. So very interesting note there. But a lot of depth players on league minimum deals were signed. And then we also saw 2 ELCs from the 2025 draft. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to a handful of news updates. Lots of news updates here involving some news from around the NHL. So first, with the NHL and NHLPA, they have finally agreed upon the CBA. Apparently there were some rumblings that they were going to have an announcement at some point. It happened, I think, a week and a half ago, but they have officially ratified it. It's good to go. The CBA is finalized for the next 4 seasons. So after this year, which is the last year of the current CBA, next year will begin the next 4 seasons of future CBA. So very interesting note there. It's good to see that that got done well ahead of time and that we don't have to worry about anything in this case. On top of that, some interesting changes we're going to see. The NHL is going to switch from an 82 to an 84 game schedule and start the season earlier in the year. So very interesting note there. The max term for UFA contracts now going to only be 6 years, and the max term for long-term deals for players with their current clubs is only going to be 7 years. So the max term for contracts for both free agents and players with their current clubs are going to go down by a year. So very interesting note there. And there were a couple of other interesting notes in the CBA too. You guys can go check out all of the things that are in the new CBA, but officially it has been announced that there's a new 4-year CBA that has been agreed upon between the NHL and NHLPA, and they've come to terms on that well before next year's deadline. So very interesting note there, and very happy that we won't have to worry about the CBA for at least the next 4 to 5 years. Next, going over to Puljujarvi, the former Oiler prospect, played over with Carolina, played over with Pittsburgh, played with Florida as an AHL player over the past little while, has wound up signing with the National League. So he has left the NHL after some bad opportunities, and he's gone back overseas. So very interesting note there. I do wonder if Puljujarvi will ever come back to the NHL, but at least for the time being, Puljujarvi is going overseas and playing over the National League. So very interesting note there. The Colorado Avalanche have hired an assistant head coach, and that is former Kraken head coach and former Flyer head coach Dave Hakstol. So Hakstol, who was fired not this offseason but the prior offseason, which led the way for the Seattle Kraken to bring a new head coach. Hakstol spent the first 3 years of Seattle's existence as their head coach and didn't really get them anywhere, so he was fired. So he joins the Colorado Avalanche staff as an assistant, and we know the Avalanche lost a few assistants over the course of this year. So very interesting note there. But Dave Hakstol has taken a job with the Colorado Avalanche and is now their new assistant, while Ryan Bourque, former NHL player, has taken a head coaching job in the AHL for the Boston Bruins. So very interesting note there. Ryan Bourque, very solid player who had a really long tenure at the NHL level, winds up going to be head coach of the Providence Bruins. So very interesting note there, and we'll see how he does as a new AHL head coach. But some interesting coaching updates from the past couple of days, as Ryan Bourque is new head coach in the AHL for Boston, and Hakstol is now an assistant in Colorado. So very interesting note there. Then we saw Columbus Blue Jackets are not signing Dave Hreschuk. Hreschuk was a 3rd round pick of the Carolina Hurricanes a couple of years back, was acquired by Columbus, I think 2 or 3 years ago. His rights expire on August 15th, and he can now become a UFA on August 15th. And apparently word is that the Blue Jackets will not be signing him to a new deal. So very interesting note there. But Hreschuk, who I think back in 2021 with a 3rd round pick, solid prospect, will become a UFA most likely on August 15th, and will be able to sign wherever he wants to. So very interesting note there. But Hreschuk's going to be leaving Columbus, so very interesting note there. And then we saw 2 more updates. First, Riley Nash, longtime journeyman veteran in the NHL, has called it quits. He wound up having 63 goals, 113 points, 176 points in 628 games. Really solid player. He played in Carolina, he played in the Rangers organization, Arizona. I think he has been in Vancouver, Dallas, and there were a couple of other teams too. Like, he had played for a big chunk of the NHL. So very interesting note there. He finally calls it quits. He signed with the Rangers last year, but didn't play at the NHL level. So he's officially called a career. So very interesting note there. But Nash, who throughout his career was a pretty solid bottom 6 guy, gone to over 600 games, put up a couple of points, and was a decent bottom 6 guy for a lot of different teams. Winds up calling it a career. So very interesting note there. But Nash has decided to hang up his skates. Knights. And lastly, according to some recent reports, the Golden Knights and Jack Eichel are starting to talk about a contract extension. Great news there. The Vegas Golden Knights really need to get this sort of thing done. Eichel needs to be extended, in my opinion, in the very near future. Now, I think according to Elliotte Friedman's recent podcast, he mentioned that Eichel's contract could be more than Marner's contract, which was 8x12. So my guess will be something like maybe an 8x13 deal for Jack Eichel will be my guess. He's one of the best players in the NHL right now. Really been great ever since being acquired by the Vegas Golden Knights in the Golden Knights organization. Had his career high in points, had a career high for a Golden Knight player in points this year. So you can see how valuable this guy is to the Vegas Golden Knights. So we shall see exactly what happens there. But very interesting to note there that the Vegas Golden Knights are trying to work together with Jack Eichel and get a contract extension well before he's eligible to hit free agency next July. So very interesting note there. But those are all the updates from our past couple of days. As the NHL and NHLPA have agreed on a 4-year CBA, Puljujarvi signs in the National League. Hakstol is the assistant coach in Colorado. Bourque is the AHL head coach in Boston. Hreschuk will not be signed by the Jackets. Nash retires from the NHL. And Eichel and Vegas are currently working together to try and get a contract extension done. So very interesting note there. And lastly here, going over to a couple of trade rumors. So we've got a couple of trade rumors here to talk about. So first, with the Boston Bruins. According to Elliotte Friedman, he says that the reason the Bruins signed a whole bunch of short-term deals with guys like Corrali, Isamont, Harris, and a couple of these other guys, and only really went long term on a guy like Tanner Jeannot because they plan on making some runs at some of the big UFAs on next year's free agent crop. Now, how many big UFAs are going to be available next year? It's yet to be seen, but there's a whole bunch of really good ones. There's, like we just talked about, Jack Eichel. If he hits free agency, he's going to be a big name. There's Connor McDavid. There's Kirill Kaprizov, Martin Necas, and there's a whole bunch of other players here who are really solid NHL level talent. Kyle Connor's another one of them. So very interesting note there. Now, if one or two of these guys wind up squeaking through their current teams and hit free agency, the Bruins are going to have, like, I think, upwards of $20 million in cap space and not really any big contracts that then they're going to need to sign next year. So with that in mind, there's a very likely chance that the Boston Bruins will be able to sign a couple of these interesting players and maybe try and take a run at one or two of them. So that makes sense as to why they didn't do too much movement this offseason if they're planning to do a couple of big moves next year. So very interesting note there. But keep around Boston Bruins next offseason as they could potentially make a run at a couple of these players seeing free agency next year, like a Connor, McDavid, Eichel, or Kaprizov. So we'll have to keep our eye on the Boston Bruins entering next year. Next, going over to the Utah Mammoth. According to Elliotte Friedman, he says that a guy to watch out for, potentially in Utah, potentially being moved, will be Nick Schmaltz. Schmaltz is entering the final year of his deal, has a $5.8 million cap hit, has been a really solid player for first Arizona and now Utah after they relocated. Really solid second line center. And we know out there at this current point in time, there are a lot of teams in desperate need of second line centers at the NHL level. So Utah could wind up trading him because he could be a very hot commodity. Now, I could also see Utah extend him because Schmaltz has been that sort of a good player in the Utah organization and Arizona beforehand. So we know the Utah team is starting to get younger, starting to grow a good organization there, has a lot of good young pieces, especially in that top 9. So we shall wait and see exactly what happens there. But we'll have to wait and see on Nick Schmaltz. Like, I think there's a really good chance they could wind up extending him before he hits free agency. But if they get to the trade deadline next year and he's not signed, they don't want to lose him for nothing via free agency, I could potentially see Utah wind up dealing him, especially if they are on the bubble of a playoff spot. So we shall wait and see on that. But keep your eye on Nick Schmaltz going forward, as he could be a guy who Utah considers trading in the very near future. Next, going over to two things mentioning the Seattle Kraken. When it comes to them, according to Elliotte Friedman, he wonders about Oleksiak's future with the Kraken organization after the Lindgren signings, and Chris Johnston says that the Kraken may be compelled to move a guy like Jared McCann. So these are two very interesting rumors when it comes to the Seattle Kraken. First, with Oleksiak, I do agree with that statement. Oleksiak and Lindgren are very similar players. They have bigger bodies, they know how to block pucks, they're very difficult to play against. They can play second pair minutes, and they're sort of your prototypical playoff style defenseman. Now, Oleksiak signed to the final year of his deal. Lindgren just signed a 4-year deal that I think is $100,000 cheaper than Oleksiak's is. So with that in mind, it makes sense to potentially move Oleksiak. I don't think he'll be in the off season. I think they'll go into the season with both Oleksiak and Lindgren. But if the Kraken get closer towards the trade deadline and they're out of the playoffs, which is why I'm at this point in time thinking they will probably be, Oleksiak I think could be one of the very interesting trade targets. I don't think Oleksiak will get extended because now they have Ryan Lindgren, and with that in mind, with him entering the final year of his deal, like I could see him be a very interesting trade deadline acquisition for a couple of different teams. So we shall wait and see on that, but I definitely do agree with Friedman's statement that Oleksiak could be a guy on the outside looking in after the Lindgren signing, so we'll have to wait and see on that. Going over to what Chris Johnston said, he says that the Kraken may be compelled to move a guy like Jared McCann. Now that's a little bit surprising to me. Ever since the expansion draft, McCann has been one of, if not the best Kraken forward in their, at this point in time, history. So I think it'll be a quite silly move to try and wind up dealing him. Like, he, I think, has 1 or 2 years left at a $5 million cap hit. Like, if they were to make him available, teams will be lining up outside the door for a chance to acquire Jared McCann because he's a solid second line center. Another thing that a lot of teams do not have a whole bunch of. So I definitely think that if the Kraken were to decide to move McCann, they could get a really solid haul. But I also think that would indicate that they would be going through a retool, rebuild phase. I'm not sure if that's what they really want to do right now. So I don't think McCann will get dealt at some point this offseason. But if they're looking bad next year at the trade deadline, I could potentially wind up seeing them move McCann, especially if he's only got like 1.5 seasons left on his contract. So I don't think at this point in time it makes much sense. But I could see at some point, maybe closer to the trade deadline, McCann's name coming up in trade rumors and potentially getting moved. I just don't see it happening right now, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. And lastly, going over to what David Pagnotta mentioned, he was mentioning that the Montreal Canadiens are still looking hard for a second line center. We know a lot of teams right now are hard in the market for a second line center, so I definitely think they could try and go after a couple of different options. The one that I think could make a lot of sense, and this is just personally my opinion, no one else's opinion, just mine, I do wonder if they try and put together a package for Mason McTavish. McTavish is an RFA. He's not one of the guys who was sent to arbitration, so he's still offer sheet eligible. I don't think the Canadiens would offer sheet him, but I could see him put together a package. They have a whole bunch of young prospects that I think would definitely intrigue the Anaheim Ducks. So I think if they were to put together maybe like a second round pick, NHL caliber forward or a defenseman and something else, I think they would be open to moving Mason McTavish. It seems like the Ducks aren't overly fond of McTavish's fit with the current organization after bringing in Granlund and Kreider, probably as to why they haven't signed him to an extension yet. So very interesting note there, but I definitely think Anaheim could be a potential trade destination for Montreal for the Habs to try and get that second line center they have been looking for in McTavish. I could also see him try and go after a guy like Marco Rossi, although I do think they probably want someone with a little bit more size than Rossi has. And there's a couple of other guys that I think could wind up fitting that bill, like Nick Schmaltz, like I just said, could wind up being a really solid second line center if Utah was to try and move him. So we'll have to wait and see on that. I'm not sure if the Habs wind up making some sort of move before the season starts. They may go into the season with guys like Newhook and Doc as their second line centers, and maybe they try and address the second line center position at the trade deadline. That's a possibility, but I definitely do think that the Habs will still continue to try and work towards trying to get a second line center. And the biggest option I think out there right now that the Habs could wind up trying to trade for is Mason McTavish. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But that's all we're talking for today. I love your guys' thoughts. What do you think about the Habs? Do they acquire a second line center before a season starts? And if so, who is it? Do the Kraken wind up moving McCann or Oleksiak at some point in the very near future? Do you think that Utah will either hold on to and extend Nick Schmaltz, or could you see him try and move him? We'll have to wait and see on that. And which UFA next year do you think the Bruins are most likely to try and target? Definitely your thoughts on all of that, plus all of the news updates from the past a while and the signings. Definitely your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video, and if you'd like to subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. Also a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I'll link to that in the description below. Cannot wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.